today? My name is Dr. Oren Swearingen. Today's date is December the 12th, 1987. My first acquaintance with the Victorio Peak story was in 1954 when I was in dental school in Dallas at Baylor University. And one day I was downtown in Dallas and passed a hardware store and saw a metal detector in the window, a used one. And so I went in to ask about it. The process of that subject of treasures came up. And the man who owned the store was E.F. Chandler. E stood for Emmanuel, but everyone called him Manuel. And he was a very talkative, likable character. He had a lot of stories to tell. He was very interesting. So we listened and he talked. We came back on other occasions and talked some more. And one thing led to another. We became very good friends. And this association lasted over many years. And in the course of this, he began to describe the Victorio Peak story. And the way that he knew about it was that he had become partners some 2 or 3 years previously with Violet Yancey, who was a former Mrs. Noss at the time of his death. And Violet had married a man named Roy Yancey, and they're living in Fort Worth. And one of Roy Yancey's lifelong friends was a man named Carol Milliken, who was a friend of Manuel Chandler. And so Carol, knowing of the story from Violet and Roy, and knowing of Manuel Chandler's interest in treasure stories, thought that he should bring them together. And so this is what he did. And Violet was looking for men to help her go out to the peak and get entry and try to get a permit from the Army. And they were unsuccessful in this, so nothing really was ever done. But in the course of all this, Violet gave to Manuel all the information that she had about the peak and the cave. One of these things that she'd given him was a parchment map that Doc Noss had found in the cave and brought out, and it was in Violet's possession. The parchment had the appearance of being very old, and the edges of it were tattered and torn somewhat. The document, as I remember, was about 24 inches high and about 18 inches wide. And the left half of the page was completely taken up with a very archaic but beautiful handwriting style in Old Spanish, which none of us were able to read. And at the bottom, the only thing readable to me was the signature of LaRue and an ancient date, which I cannot exactly remember, but it's something in the area of 1797. Then the right-hand half of the page showed a drawing or sketch of the peak and marking the location of the entrance to the cave and showing the extent and course of the cave within the peak. So from this, I was able to know pretty close to where the exact location of the cave was, in my opinion. And then there were other documents that they had and maps of the area and enough material that I felt like I could find the place without any trouble. So Carol Milliken had been to the peak on one occasion with Violet, and she had shown him several features, and she had described a cave that Doc told her he had used. And they were unable to locate it, but they gave me this description. And on one occasion in 1955, Carol Milliken took me and a friend of mine, he's now a doctor, David Tate, now in Irving, and the three of us went out there. And then later, Dr. Tate and I made another visit the next year, in 1956, immediately after our graduation from dental school. So I made 2 trips during that time period. And then at that time, the law was that everyone was required to fulfill 2 years of military service. And so I'd been deferred during my time in school, and so when graduating, I applied for service in the Army to get that out of the way. And I had my 6 weeks indoctrination or orientation at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. And at the conclusion of that, they posted on the bulletin board a list of bases around the world that were available. If we wanted to be assigned to one of those, we could put our name on the list. And I noticed on the list that White Sands was available. And so I applied for it, and I was the only one who asked for it, so I received it. And my purpose in doing that was to be out there to explore the cave, and or look for Doc's cave. So I arrived at White Sands in November of '56. And my first trip out there was in a rented Jeep, but in a short time I bought a Jeep and began to make weekend excursions to the area. And in the course of my working in the dental clinic at White Sands, I had two patients. One was Colonel Howard Wells, who was the provost marshal, and I described to him what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and received from him permission to do so, with the stipulation that I not photograph any military installations or pick up any unexploded projectiles or anything of this nature. It might hurt me. And so at another time, another patient was Colonel Dollar, who was chief of the Range Riders. I explained to him what I wanted to do and got permission from him also. And he said that in the event that I was ever stopped by a Range Rider, to have them call him, and he would tell them it was all right. But I never saw any. So, feeling that I was secure and permission from those two authorities, I proceeded to go out there every other weekend, practically for the entire 2 years I was stationed at White Sands. And I explored every cave I could find on the peak, on Geronimo Peak, and the full length of Hembrillo Canyon. And there were quite a few. I was just trying to eliminate every other possibility and narrow it down by process of elimination. I was looking for one in particular that had been described by Violet Yancey to Carol Milliken and then to me. Pretty soon I found that one. And the cave was quite a dangerous one from the standpoint of possibility of snakes. It opened into a large room inside and was bisected by a vertical fault that went from floor to ceiling, and the depths of which were impenetrable. It came to an end about 170 feet from the entrance, with a shaft that went down further that was filled with rocks too large to move. But by shining my flashlight and sticking my head down in the hole, I could see around the rocks to depth of something in the order of 40 feet before my view was blocked by another rock. But I could tell that it continued on. No telling how deep. A small animal could have negotiated it. Then on top of the peak was the so-called chimney shaft, which is boarded over, but there are no locks on it. We opened the lid of that and saw a ladder going down in it to great depth. But the wood did not look strong enough to support our weight, so we didn't trust the ladder, and we used a rope to descend it to the bottom, and found that it connected with another shaft at the base of the cliff, where there was an opening about 15 feet, I suppose, on a side, quite a large opening, and dropped down about 15 feet and on a ladder. And then it entered what looked to be a natural cleft in the face of the cliff, where bats were roosting. And this tunnel connected with the chimney shaft, and there was a windlass on the right-hand side, a homemade type big windlass. And then near that there was another shaft going down about another 40 feet to a dead end. And then also near the top of the peak was another shaft that was open about 35, 40 feet down and about 10, 12, 14 feet across. I went down that and it was a dead end. And then there was another tunnel that was open that was big enough to walk into. The ceiling was 6 or 7 feet high, and the doorway was probably 6 or 8 feet wide, and it went straight in only a depth of about 20 feet. And so that was a blind lead.
Let's get back. First of all, if you could keep your eyes
Up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe look at me.
Yeah, where'd that glare?
Yeah, it is bright. As far as the map that you got from the Yancey group and your personal observations inside the peak, how accurate, how close was that map to what was going on inside the peak? And if you could answer that in such a way that you
Well,
the map and the interior of the peak.
Yeah, remembering how the map was drawn and the location of the cavern within the mountain, it was immediately obvious that all the crevices and tunnels that were open that I knew of were in an area that was not over the cavern. All the probes that were made were evidently an effort to try to intercept the tunnel that led to the cavern, which is sort of like hitting a needle, hunting for a needle in a haystack, because you're trying to probe down here and hit a little narrow tunnel. When to me the logical thing is to go where the main cavern is, where it's wide, a couple of 100 feet wide or so, and then sink your shaft and have much greater chance of hitting it. But all the work that's been done is in the wrong area, it appears to me.
Now, tell me again what 2 years that you were there under the service.
I went into the Army at 1st of October, 1956, and I was discharged, I think, the 2nd of October of 1958.
In those 2 years, did you see anything inside the tunneling, any of the tunnels, or any of the caves that would indicate to you that there was ever any gold or treasure there? Did you see any?
I wish I had, but no, I didn't see anything like that, of that nature.
Did you see?
Go
ahead.
I saw evidence of, mining activity and shoring and timbering and that sort of thing in places.
Well,
but as far as anything of any value, no.
Were there other armed forces personnel that shared your interests?
Well, the only ones.
From you, I mean, not really even working with you, but
no.
Was there talk on the base?
Very little. It was not an unknown thing, but it was not actively being discussed or speculated about. In fact, it was very quiet. There's not much going on in 56, 7, and 8.
What kind of access was there to the peak? How many? Was there a bunch of road work, or what kind of terrain and road conditions was it?
The road conditions were very poor. The road across the desert, after you passed Jack Bruton Ranch, which now presently is the Dick Hill Ranch, from that point on, the road was not maintained by the state or county, whoever maintains the roads. And it was very deep in drift sand, very fine powdery sand. And even with a Jeep like I had and four-wheel drive low range, it could just barely pull through that sand.
And what about at the peak itself? Was there a road?
Well, the road,
the
road winds around and comes to the crest of Hembrillo Pass, and then it switchbacks and goes down into the basin. And that was not too bad a road, but there are places where water had caused some erosion in it, and a little rough and bumpy, and a little narrow in places, but it wasn't too bad of a road.
Okay, now in your history of your activity around the peak, have you seen any changes?
Been a lot of changes, been drastic changes over the years.
Drastic changes?
Very drastic.
Like, for instance?
Well, in the early 50s and early 60s, there were quite a few tunnels on the cave. There's 10 or 11 that I know of and have been in. And then some work was done in 63 that, obviously by design, has obliterated all the openings to these 10 or 11 tunnels. They've been covered. Plus, a tremendous amount of bulldozer blading has been done on the peak, and it's crisscrossed almost like a checkerboard. I was astonished when first time I came out there after this had been done and saw what had been done to the mountain.
Are there any helipads, any way for aircraft to land on or around the peak?
There's a place that has been smoothed off on an area I call the saddle of the peak that accommodates a helicopter, and there has been some activity there. Plus another place further out towards the desert.
Um, is there anything else about the peak that's been changed? Oh, I know. Are there charges? Are there non-detonated missiles, or is there any evidence that the thing has been bombarded, or the area has been shelled?
Well, in a sense, yes. I've been out there before when on weekends when the Air National Guard would be having gunnery practice, and the planes would be very high. You could hear the machine guns going, and you'd have to look way high to find them, but there'd be one plane pulling a tow target and others making passes at that tow target, shooting at it in short bursts with machine guns. And I have found 2 or 3 50 caliber slugs, and I have found empty cases, but I've never seen any unfired ammunition or unexploded ammunition. But the old Henderson Goat Ranch used to be at the foot of the peak. Someone used to take shots at it because it used to have a lot of bullet holes in it. And now it's been burned and destroyed and it's gone.
Are there any holes, craters, any explosions?
No, there are no craters that I've ever seen, and no shelling has been done that I know of. I've often been told by the military that there are dangerous things out there to watch for, but in probably 40 or 50 trips to the peak between 56 and 58, I saw no evidence at all of anything of a dangerous nature.
When was the first time that you started noticing heavy road improvement out there?
Well, the road improvement, I guess, was at the time of the 77 expedition. I'm trying to remember whether it was done, whether much was done in the way of improving in 63 when the Gaddis Company was out there. It could be that that's when it was. I'm not real sure about that. But it definitely was improved. It was almost like a highway later on. You could drive a Buick sedan in there now.
All right. Where we want to pick up is when you're going into the North Shaft. First of all, did you know what shaft was what? Did you know what who the shaft was?
Mm-hmm.
Shaft?
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you talk about specifically going into the North Shaft and seeing what you saw there?
Okay. Well, like I said, in the beginning, we went to the very top chimney shaft and opened that up and went down it on a rope. Actually, we tied the rope around ourselves and used the ladder with the rope as a precaution in case a rung broke. We were very much afraid it could happen. And some of them weren't very secure. But we went the full length of that, and it was in a natural fault also, which was obvious. But a lot of rubble, a lot of broken rock, and a lot of stuff had tumbled down. And of course, I knew the story of Doc Noss and Montgomery using the dynamite to try to open the tunnel up, make it more easy to go in and out. And I knew about it collapsing, and so I assumed that that's what a lot of this rubble was caused by. I don't know, but that's what it appeared to be. And then the other lower shaft that connected with it did make use also of a fault. The fault, there's a main fault that bisects the peak running east and west. And then there are 2 or 3 other faults that go off at an angle from that one. And this is one of these divergent faults that goes through this particular cave, and also goes across where the so-called soldier's hole goes in. I don't think it's the same fault that bisects the other cave that I described that I thought was Violet's cave. That's a separate and distinct fault. And then there are faults in there that are at right angles to these faults. So the whole, that part of the mountain is completely broken up with faulting.
Did you see any signs of any activity, any work that had been done there other than the timbering?
At that time in '56, it looked like nothing had been done there for many years.
Okay, now what about the windlass?
The old windlass, as I remember, it was kind of a homemade thing and out of the wooden drum sort of a thing, and it was pretty big in diameter, something like this. About 3 feet or so, and with handles on it, so you could kind of turn it this way, like an old ship's wheel, with the spokes on the outside of the rim, something like that. And and it was set up near this other shaft that went down about 40 feet, that was in the middle of this fault, and the chimney shaft was only a little bit further ahead of you and up. And from in there, you could see the top. I don't know how high that was. Inside, it looks like it's a great distance. When you're outside on the surface looking at it, the cliff is not that high. It's misleading when you're inside. The distance looks much greater. And when you're on the ladder looking down, it looks like it's a long way.
Okay, let's see, when was the last time that you were inside that mountain?
Well, that's got to be about '83.
Oh, that recently.
Oh, yeah. This was an ongoing thing for many, many years.
And have you seen, were you in that shaft again in '93?
No, well, the first place is no necessity. There's no place to go in it. It's blocked, and it takes many, many men and hours of work to open it up. So there's really no purpose in it, but it's locked. The Army has welded it shut so that you couldn't open it if you wanted to. In fact, I was out there one time, and a pickup, a bulldozer had a pickup in tow and had taken it right to the very top almost. And it was a welding truck.
Okay.
What else did you want to ask me?
I think that's probably good enough.
All right.
Okay. You have a plane to catch it.
There's no point in describing the other tunnels.
Well, was there
Like the soldier's hole that connects up now with the ring room and the Gaddis workings. There's really no point in that. But there was dynamite in there. And what about the one that had the hopper in it? Should I tell about that?
Okay, yeah, you can tell about that. Are we still wrong? Okay. Yeah.
Okay. After the Gaddis company had been there and done all their work, I was curious to see what they had done. And a friend of mine who knew about my association with it wanted to go out and see it. So I took him with me. And this was about '65 or '6. And I wanted to show him Violet's Cave, but it had been covered, and I couldn't find it. And so in the process of searching for it, near it, we found another opening that I had never known before existed. And we opened that up. And on exploring it, it was a tunnel that led northwest. And the tunnel, I remember it to be something around 150 or 60 feet in length, finally culminating in a large room. But just before entering the room, and there was tunneling, they were showing in the tunnel previous to this, and it was following a fault also. It was on the right side of the tunnel. And in the big room, that fault continued on, but it was blocked with a lot of rubble. But just before entering the large room, there was a wooden chute or a hopper coming down out of the ceiling, which had a door in it that could be pulled out to let rock tumble through and then hauled off somewhere. And the hopper was about this wide, that's about 2 feet, square. And the part hanging out of the ceiling was a good 6 or 7 feet in length. And then the room itself was more or less round and probably 35, 40 feet in diameter. And the ceiling might have been 25 or 30 feet high, kind of doming a little bit, arching. And in the top of that, there was a small opening through which, it being nighttime, I was able to see a star shining outside. So that room was not too far from the surface. Even though in going into the cave, we were going downhill all the time, that part of the peak was sloping all the time. So our mean distance between the surface probably didn't change much. And there was dynamite in there also, besides the shoring and everything. So somebody had been doing some mining in there. I don't know when. But I did not find this cave in 56, 7, and 8. Suddenly there it was in 1965.
And you think that was the Gaddis?
I, at that time, thought it was the Gaddis Tunnel. I learned later that the Gaddis Tunnel was on the other side of the peak. So I don't know. This is a mystery. I don't know who did this.
And how far into the mountain do you think that went?
This one ran its full length, probably 175 feet or so.
And you would, at what level elevation do you think this was at?
The opening to it was, if anyone is familiar with the peak and knows where Soldier's Hole is, the entrance to this is roughly at the same level.
So is that about 200?
And within 50 feet of Soldier's Hole.
Oh, it's that close.
Mm-hmm. Very close.
Is that in the limestone?
And that's also within 50 feet of Violet's tunnel.
And so that's about 200-foot elevation, isn't it?
It's 3/4 of the way up the peak.
Yeah. Okay, so it's even a little higher.
Yeah, it's high. And the Gaddis Tunnel is lower and on the other side of the mountain.
Okay, I think that'll do it.
All right.